an individual is either aiming towards the truth or they're not. So they're either innocent or they're not. Now you
But
can have
but
an
but when you're aiming at the truth, suppose I am in a state of mind, I am doing something. Maybe I am painting, I'm making a painting, or I am trying to feed the poor or whatever. I'm trying to do something worthwhile. While I'm doing that, like second to second, moment to moment, I might get distracted a little bit. You give a child a piece of bread, and a feeling goes through you. Ooh, I'm very special. I'm very kind.
yeah, that's
And
evil.
yeah, but you might get struck by that temptation or feeling, and maybe you do a little bit. Maybe you look into the camera uh, when you're doing that, and while you're oh, I'm so special, so heroic, and while you're doing that,
Fake a
you
mirror.
could become aware. Oh wait, this is not how it works, and you snap out of it, and you log in again to the true mission. So
Right.
in this instance, both the true heroism and the untrue heroism were present. And this can happen in a split second. And in
Right.
my experience, it continuously happens. You're aiming at the right thing and you get distracted. Oh, you go back and whoa,
Right.
whoa.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. And it is paradoxical because it is precisely being steadfast to the truth and to innocence is what allows you in the first place to see like these patterns of evil sometimes even within yourself. But it is precisely by looking at them that you also walk past them. They cannot get a hold of you. And then the loss of innocence is when you don't see those things and they do have a hold on you, but you pretend that that's not the case. You pretend that that's not
Yes,
happening.
but you lose your innocence continuously, right? I lose my innocence continuously. Get little bit pulled into something, and oh, I get aware, and I detach again, or maybe detach is not the right word, but it goes through me or whatever, and then I'm more locked in, and I get distracted. I'm not always in the zone. Um, so evil and not evil, or ego and not ego, or love and not love can be in the same person. Right. I don't see how it's
Yes and
so
no.
basic,
Yes and no.
because it
The
happens
way,
all the time.
yes, and in a way, yes, but in a way, no. Maybe let me make a metaphor. Like maybe what I'm talking about is like the center of gravity, for example, on a physical object. You know how you have an object and the object has a weight, and then maybe the distribution of the weight in the object can changes, but there's a certain that like a center of gravity in the object, like a point where the I don't remember exactly the specifics, so forgive me if I make a mistake about this to anybody who's listening, and feel free to correct me. But it's like a point in which the weight has more effect, so to speak, right? So
Yeah, I think I
it
know
is
what you
like
mean. Yeah.
that. I think like a person is either centered on God, basically, or on the devil, basically. Now, modern words for that would be like the true self or the ego, or blah 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 blah. Modern words are boring and weak, by the way. So I don't. I wish I didn't have to use them because it's basically that. It's basically God and the devil. That's what it is. But modern people are afraid of those words, so they use the ego, blah blah blah, and it's a lot of cope, in my opinion. So your center of gravity, so to speak, is either on one or the other, right? Now, your center of gravity, when it's on God as well, it doesn't mean that in the world you don't make mistakes or anything like that. It does mean that you don't care about mistakes in that way. Because I have noticed a pattern that I have noticed a lot is that people who are not innocent, they when another person make a mistake, they always project evil to the mistake itself. and that's a temptation also for the other person to lose their innocence, like to pretend that because you made a mistake, then now you're a piece of shit or something like that. Yeah, and in a way, it's extremely, even in practical ways, it's extremely silly and extremely dumb because it's like, sometimes I'm walking down the stairs and I maybe think there's another step, but there isn't, so I make a mistake and it looks silly. Am I gonna stop walking because of that? Am I gonna be like, oh, I guess I'm not a walker, so I stop walking forever? No, but so it's the same thing. Like you can be centered in the truth, and of course you're gonna make like practical mistakes, but it just doesn't matter. They kind of solve themselves out.
No, but they're not
Whereas,
practical. They're not practical mistakes. They're real mistakes. They're real,
yeah,
like in the example of feeding the poor, a little bit of the temptation. You succumb to the temptation a little bit. Maybe you, even if you doubt for 1 second, you have a doubt. This is a real mistake, not some practical thing. This is a lack of being centered on God, on love, and
right.
that's real.
Yes,
You
but
know.
that's why I do make a binary distinction in the sense that you can only perceive it like that, and you can only look at it as a mistake when your center of gravity is towards God, so to speak, or towards the truth.
Yeah,
You
that's
see,
true, but I wouldn't, if my center of gravity was truly, fully in God, the temptation wouldn't even arise. I wouldn't even get distracted for a few seconds.
you could say that
Um,
when you're closer to Him, that will be the
so,
case,
so
right?
in
So
that
things get
moment, you are not centered in God because it would not have happened
you
otherwise.
could you could put it that way. That's okay. For me, the metaphor would be more precise that the point of gravity center in God, but you're not there yet. Like you're still far away, maybe. So you still have a lot of stuff, and as you get closer, those things get cleansed out of you. That would makes more sense for me. But then,
Mm.
so evil of the lack of innocence would be when you're actually not centered towards God, so to speak, or towards the truth. You're not going there in our metaphor, because in a way that's impossible actually, right? In the sense that the truth is what is, so you cannot actually be against it in a way. But it does seem to be the case that the ego can is self-delusional in a way. So
But if you're not centered on God, you would say then you are centered on evil.
yes,
As in, you do have to, you always have a center. And if it's
yes,
not
and
God, then it's the devil.
then it's evil. Yeah, but interesting enough, the devil always it takes it always comes in the forms of fake idols, all sorts of them. The most common fake idol, for example, nowadays is Jesus Christ. Not because Jesus Christ was a fake prophet. I don't think he wasn't. He was, but because the people make his image into a fake idol. Most modern Christians do that, in my opinion,
Yeah.
at least. But I think it's quite obvious for anyone.
You even see it with celebrities, right? Just a
Yes,
celebrity and their fans have
correct.
also made it into something else. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Perhaps the most common fake idol, even more than Jesus Christ, or with a higher status than Jesus
It's,
Christ, according to our modern Christians, not to me, is mothers, right? In the modern world, mothers are always like idolized in very weird ways. And it's a mess, to
yeah,
say
but
the least.
that's more cultural, I think, right? That's not
No, I think
actually in the Bible a commandment. Right? Or there's
well,
not
fake
that much
idols is a commandment.
emphasis. There's not
Fake
much
idols,
emphasis. Sorry?
it is a commandment not to have fake idols.
Yeah, yeah, I know. But I mean, are mothers just as portrayed just as well as Jesus Christ in the Bible? I don't think so.
No,
It's not in the
that's
source material,
no, that's
right?
fake Christianity does that. Evil, like
Yeah, the cultural
people, fake
Christianity
Christians.
form.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it cultural because I think it's just a pattern of evil. I think from what I've observed, from what I gathered, when a society starts degrading and so it starts becoming evil, it starts losing its spiritual center, so to speak. It all that always happens. Like women start being worshipped always, and then mothers, of course, start exploiting that in one or another.
But this idea that there's always a center, I don't know if I agree with that.
How can they not be? It is kind of like the center of gravity. You can have different shapes, different distributions of weight, but there always you will always be able to have a center, even if you cannot figure it out because blah blah blah. There will
Yeah,
be a
but
center.
for many people, the center is just some random thing, like power or
That's
whatever,
a
you
fake
know.
idol. Yeah, exactly.
But I don't think that's evil necessarily.
I
Sometimes it
think
is.
I think by
I
definition it
think
is. But again, I'm
the
not speaking
false
about.
the false self is not necessarily evil. I think evil is like the worship and the double downing on the false self. But
Correct.
just
I
the
agree with
false
that.
self is just distraction, whatever, and it's neither good nor evil, or it's sometimes a little good, sometimes
Yeah,
a little bad. Yeah.
the way I see it, evil stems from putting anything, it doesn't matter what, above the truth. And when I use the word truth, capital T truth and capital G God almost as the same. So when a person puts something above it, then evil stems from that. In whatever way it will,
Yes, that's
doesn't.
possible, but evil is like anti-truth, I would say.
Yes,
Evil is like the
exactly,
inversion. And
exactly.
but so if you are not aligned with the truth, but also not aligned with anti-truth, you're not you're,
Um,
you're not
And then
good
what are
nor
you?
evil.
Then you're not. Then you're not alive or something. Like,
Yeah, you're
then what
NPC,
are?
right? That's the
But
NPC,
that's
I would
impossible.
say. But
That's already a lie. Nobody is an NPC. Nobody actually is an NPC by nature. It's like, this human is just like that. It's just soulless. Like
I
it's just a
would
robot.
say everyone is an NPC by nature.
Most people are.
Uh,
No,
your body, your mind is NPC. It's beholden to just laws of action reaction. And
I've
what
never
what
met a
what is
3-year-old that
more
was an NPC ever.
what?
I've never met like a 2 or 3-year-old that was an NPC that wasn't vibrant
Never.
and heroic. There might be. Like I'm not saying that
Oh.
it couldn't be, but I've never
Even
met.
when even when I was a child, I felt like the other children were NPCs.
Yeah, but
I
probably after 2 or 3. I have a memory of one girl that I was like 3 or 4, and she was already an NPC. So I've seen the possibility, but my point remains the same. That it's like that's a something is happening. Like people are not just NPCs, as in that person is just an NPC. That it doesn't happen that way.
yeah,
That's
I think they are.
it's way
They're
darker.
just it's I don't think so. For many humans, it is. There are humans caught up in evil, but I think most are just confused, just doing random things, just walking to the right of the room and to the left of the room without any idea of what they're doing.
Yeah, but you don't
That's
get
the
there
majority
by
for me.
what I. This is also interesting about heroism and innocence, for example, because people who are heroic slash innocent are also could be called the natural men and women. And if I remember correctly, Carlyle calls them that too at some point. And I cannot agree more because it is actually that's the norm now. That's the actual normal. Of course, it's not the normal as
Yes,
in most people are
I
like that nowadays, but that's
I
the
get
actual
that idea,
natural.
and that's also with cats and dogs and animals and lions and
Right.
tigers and plants.
So
They are
NPCs are the product of evil, and the producer
no,
of evil.
I don't think so. I think just that indeed the natural style is aligned with God, but that's because God is sort of above you, and you are too stupid yet to deviate. So God decides everything. This happens for nature and animals, right? God just does everything. Every decision is made for them in a way. And that's why they're always aligned with God, even though they don't understand anything about
No,
God.
but that's a good description for actual innocence. But NPC
I
is
think
not
that's
like
just
that.
I think that's just ignorance. And
In what?
also it's also innocence, I guess, but a lower form. You know what uh, God decides for trees and for cats and dogs. And um, then we have the level of humans, and then you start having a choice by doing something different than what God wants, right? And we or what God is, and we all get caught up in it. In my view, we all start deviating from that, and then you become good or evil. You get aligned with love or not with love or with fear or whatever, and then you move back to the godly harmony, but you are God now. You you decide you decide the things that you're gonna do, and they happen to align with God because you are full of understanding of those things, while the cat and dog is aligned just because they don't know any better. They don't decide.
Right.
And I think humans get to decide for the first time in evolution, right? Humans at the human point, you get to decide, and then you reach some point where you decide on, I'm going for the truth or I'm going for the anti-truth. I'm going for good or I'm going for evil. But before that point, humans are just NPC. They're like cats and dogs in a way, but with the capacity, with some self-awareness, with enough self-awareness and a separated individualized consciousness to not do what God wants, but they're also not doing the opposite of God. They're just trying out some stuff, and it's not clear what the goal is to them until after a while, and they start endeavoring to become aligned with love and God again, but in a conscious way instead of being forced by the universe like the animals. And before that happens, you're neither. You're not good, you're not evil, you're just a very, very annoying uh, thing with a brain that creates a lot of chaos for everyone.
Well, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not sure because then we have different definitions of NPC. For me, NPCs are basically is basically evil without worldly power. That's what it is. So people who are evil with worldly power, I also see them as NPCs. Like most celebrities are NPCs, for example. They think they aren't because they have the worldly stuff that is like, oh wow, woohoo, oh, I have this stuff. But that thinking in of itself for me is like an NPC. It's like you're an NPC. You're not connected to the source. Uh,
Yeah.
so,
Probably,
and I
yeah.
do think that it's technically speaking evil because sometimes people don't like me calling it evil because they think that I'm like making an accusation or suggesting a course of action. It's like no, for me, by definition, it is because it's like you gave somehow or other, you accepted the lie. So when I call that evil, I also say that with a certain type of compassion. That it's like we all have to deal with that, as you were describing before. It's just like that. Some people allow themselves to suffer the path. They allow themselves to look at it and to be like, "Wow, this sucks. I want to grow towards God. I want to grow towards the truth." And then some people just ignore it, which is obviously impossible because it's like you are alive. You cannot ignore life. So they ignore it, which is they repress it, and then you become an NPC, and then you're evil, and then you're like
But
one with
but
evil.
you speak about the lie. But I
Yes,
think just the lie is I think there's many lies. A lie a lie can be just something that's incorrect, and it can also be the denial of truth, the denial of God, and that's
right.
evil. But
The
the active
the
denial,
lie is the denial of truth. Yes,
yeah,
lies in
but
general is like truths in general.
yeah, but just being a celebrity and thinking, oh, I'm super cool because I have money and everybody knows me. That's not. That's usually not the lie. That's just
Could
an
not be.
ignorant
Yes,
thought.
that's just a silly example.
Sorry.
That's just like a silly example. But yeah, it could not be the lie. It could be just a confused person. Yes, like I
Yes,
mean,
but
you're
I
a young
think
guy. Whatever.
that's the great majority of people that are not really so of sometimes they're caught up a little bit in the lie and sometimes to a bigger degree, but the vast majority are not really caught up in the lie, and they're also not really caught up in the truth. They're
I mean,
just, yeah,
my
they
thinking
don't know
about
what
it
they're
is
doing.
my thinking. Well, but that adds another dimension to it. You see, because almost by definition, you cannot actually know what you're doing when you're evil. Because why would you do that? You see, like if you actually knew what you were doing, you would never do that. So, but at the same time, they did it. We did it. People do it. So, what was I going to
Ah,
say before this?
I almost think that evil is more true to me, despite it being the exact opposite and inversion of it. It feels more true to me than NPC, just because it's higher, because it's very difficult to to invert the truth. You'd have to know the truth to invert it, and
Right,
so
but you can
that's
also just ignore
so
it.
to progress in evil, to become truly deeply evil, you'd have to have some knowledge of the truth for that.
Yes.
So in how the so in a way it's more true because in the very sophisticated horrible way that they are lying, the truth is you can feel the effects, the echoes of the truth still, but with the
Right.
NPC nothing is there.
Right. You could argue that NPCness is even more evil in that way. You could argue. I'm not
Yeah, and
saying that
I
necessarily is.
wouldn't call it evil, I would just call it stupider, less aware, more confused, less more caught up in lifelessness. Yeah.
What I think is that I don't make any attempt to measure evil anymore because that's also a slippery slope to hell. Because in order to measure evils, you have to assume that you have the knowledge of good and evil. You have to buy the apple. So I don't know. I cannot point a finger specifically and say like, oh, this here and this there is evil. Sometimes I can intuitively, sometimes I can see stuff and I follow my intuition. I trust it, like if I see that a person does something and I get the sense that they're evil, I usually, If I can see that, then I can see that, and that's the truth. Whatever. But so the reason that I can say something that might sound controversial, but it's actually very simple. Why I say that is like, yeah, most people, vast majority of people are evil, and all NPCs are evil. Is
Mm.
because it's very simple. Is because if that wasn't the case, then the world would be like exploding with beauty. Like like every single building would be beautiful. Every single university would be like the extremely vibrant and courageous, full of people wanting to know more, wanting to see the beauty of existence, and etc. etc.
Why
Every
would
like
it be that way?
everything, because why wouldn't it? What
Because
would be stopping it
because
from
if
happening?
NPCs are not evil, it doesn't mean they're good. It just means they're NPC. They don't know what they're doing, so they create freaks of nature. That this is my explanation for
Right.
why everything is ugly. Sure, I have to admit there is a portion of the world, the force of evil works in this world. That's true. You know, it's not
Thank you.
not there at all. But the vast majority of the NPCs are just they don't know what they're doing. They 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 just create little freaks of their own thoughts, and you don't have to be evil to do that.
I mean, what is it then? What what is it then?
um yeah, that's a difficult question, because for me that's like the basis. It's just this is the
Is it?
normal thing as a
Well,
human.
why though? I mean, it's normal in modern worlds, yes. Like it is normal. It's the norm. But is that like
Yeah, but does it even have to have a name? Because
yeah.
if I with music, if I don't know what I'm doing and I try to write a song and I'm sort of confused, caught up in my own delusions, but I'm not evil, not really good, I'm just an ignorant person, and I make music, then it will also be ugly.
No, you see, I think that's where we differ. It's like, no, why would it be ugly? Like when a child is learning to
Because you're
walk and
thinking with your
they cannot.
separated consciousness, and you don't see the harmony anymore, so it will be ugly because it doesn't resonate with the truth. I think the human experience is fundamentally different from cats and dogs and trees, in the
Yeah.
sense that the prerequisite for being human is almost deviating from the path. And then this separated self-consciousness, forgetting yourself, not knowing, not seeing the harmony anymore, forgetting that you're part of that, and that everything is part of that, that just necessarily creates a sort of disturbing feeling
Right.
in everything you do. And
Right.
even in, yeah.
Right. What I think, and that's why I call it the lie. The difference is for me is the lie. What I call evil is when you introduce the lie, which is like when you try to deny that experience, when you try to
Yeah,
pretend that you're not suffering some stuff like that. That's when it becomes evil for me. It's
but
not the
the
fact that
people
we
in the
suffer everything.
universities, but the
What?
people in the universities, they
For
are,
example,
most of them are not trying to deny it. They think
are you
they think
kidding?
they are doing research. They think they're looking for the truth. They go home to their wife and they say, I am doing research and scientific principles, and they think they are doing that. It
I mean,
Most
some
of them.
like don't get me wrong. I'm not pooping in everybody at the universities. Okay, let me get that straight. But it's like on our modern world, if you are person, a university that truly loves what you do, you know that there's something deeply wrong. It's impossible not to see that at some point. Even if you had the luck of being in a certain environment in which this was reduced to the minimum, at this point you have to notice that that's not what's happening on the other university. So there is this weird state of affairs in which people don't see the truth, but it's a lie because you cannot not. You know what I mean? You might not be able to put it in words in a proper way. You might not know what it is. You might be dumb. You might not know how to do the task. Blah blah blah. But that's different from the lie. Like the lie, people can lie,
Yeah, I'm not
but not
saying
practical
evil
lies I'm
doesn't
talking about
exist.
here. What?
I'm not saying that evil doesn't exist. It exists.
Right. So where is it,
But
according to you?
where is it?
Yeah,
Well,
if it exists and it's not NPCs and it's not the majority of people nowadays, which you is okay, like
well,
could be the case.
it's
Where do
some
you think it is?
we have seen some examples of evil people in history, right?
Right.
Maybe someone like Genghis Khan um,
Right.
seems pretty evil to me. But also, the Bukele found people doing satanic rituals. You know, they were
Right.
the gangsters doing satanic rituals. They and of course, a lot of gangsters, a lot of criminals are caught up in evil. So we see it. Most are not fully on that path, but we see it. But we have also seen people like Rasputin, cult leaders. You know, the,
Yeah.
we have seen evil there, and serial killers, many of them, and but also, of course, in politics and government, there is like overrepresentation of truly evil people, right?
Right.
So I see these people, but
So where
yeah,
do these people get their power from?
they extract it from others.
Exactly. From which others?
Yeah, us, other humans, or animals,
Right.
even,
Yeah,
or
but more
nature.
specifically, to make it more clear, if the general population would all be innocent slash heroic people, could they extract any power from those people?
If they were all good, no.
God,
But
there you
if
go. That's
but
what I
if
mean. You
they're
see?
yeah, but you didn't prove anything because
Yeah, that
I'm
to the
not
extent.
saying the NPCs are good. So there's
Okay, so
the
they're evil.
NPCs. No, it's not. You're not good or evil. The NPC is in between or nothing at all in
I
those
think
terms.
that's I think that's a trap
It's
from our
just
modern times.
it's just a karmic response machine. That's the
Right.
NPC.
I think that's one of the traps of our modern times. And you know what is interesting to me, that I think the vision of good and evil as being like a mixture of substances in which you can have certain amounts and stuff like that. There's a plot twist behind that because in a way it actually lacks compassion for me, because it lacks compassion towards the good and the carrying of the cross that it takes to be heroic, even though it's also simple in a way because to the extent that one falls back into one's innocence, life becomes way more joyful and beautiful, even though it does come with a certain carrying of the cross. Like you have to suffer the precisely sometimes the lack of truth in your life and in around you and whatnot, right? But oh, what was I saying just before that?
a lack of compassion in
Right,
seeing
right,
good
right.
and evil can be mixed, that sort of
Exactly,
stuff.
exactly, exactly. If we don't allow ourselves to see that we are either good or evil, in a way, we lose compassion for people. Because, especially for the, even in the word, there's a hint there, right? Because compassion means shared passion. So you cannot have it if you don't, if you're not carrying the cross, so to speak, then you cannot have compassion. So only the good can have compassion. You see? And so that means that there's something else that is the lack of that, which is just evil. And
No, whoa, 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 whoa. Compassion, the lack of compassion. Yes, I agree until that. But yeah, lack of compassion.
yeah,
That's it. And sometimes they can be evil, but lack of compassion doesn't just means lack of compassion.
well, it depends what you mean by compassion, because I don't mean by compassion the sentimental version of compassion over modern times. That comes from evil, by the way. Compassion is not a sentimental thing. It's a very the word tells you what it is. Shared passion. And by passion I don't mean, oh, it is my passion to do this stuff because I feel good doing it. I mean passion as in the passion of the Christ. And I'm not saying that I don't have conclusive definitions for this. It's open to be argued. Anybody who's watching has a comment, please let us know. I will be curious. But what I do say is like, A, it is certainly not the sentimentality of the leftists going, oh, that's not what I'm talking about. That's like, for me, that's just like most of the time comes from evil. Most of the times, at least. Whatever. But I don't, by evil, I don't mean, it doesn't mean that I have anything that people should do anything bad towards it. That's not what I mean at all. I mean, technically speaking, like it's conducive to evil. Maybe that's a better way of
Yes,
saying
but
it.
I think you are I don't interpret it as we should hate evil people or that you're blaming them.
Okay.
I don't
Okay.
interpret it that way. I on a technical level I think it's wrong. It's not true. But
Why not?
and take a look at animals. They
Yeah.
don't have self-awareness, right? By and large. Most of them don't have a
Yeah.
separated
They're all
concept
evil
of
as
self.
fuck. They're all completely evil. No, I'm kidding.
No, but
I don't know.
they don't have a separated sense of self yet. But they exist in a lower realm. They
Yeah.
exist. Which has its own laws in a way, which are all expressions of higher laws in turn. Um, and at the human level, we all have self awareness. All humans, or yeah, maybe some weird humans don't, but in general, we all have separated concept of self, and but not all of them, and have the good or are in good or evil. We are working towards that, and then comes the next step of existence, and the good and evil worlds and people or aliens or whatever, they relate to us like we relate to cats and dogs. So of course we exist. The NPC exists. Just because the NPC doesn't have um, isn't yet aligned with good or evil yet, doesn't mean he doesn't exist. He doesn't have to be good or evil to exist. Just like cats and dogs don't have to be good or evil to exist, or trees.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I don't think that state is possible, at least for human beings. I don't know about animals. It's complicated for me to think about animals. Maybe they're all evil. I don't know.
Well,
Or maybe they're all good. I don't know. But
I know for sure that they're not good or evil. Yeah,
yeah,
maybe some demonic spirit could take possession of the body of an animal, but then like the consciousness that dwells in them,
well,
that's not good
here
or evil.
maybe I discovered where we are differing here. Because for me, for example, when to the extent that you are aligned in the good, like so to speak, in the sense that, as we spoke before, you can be generally in that direction, but you can also sometimes be, far away from it. Let's say that that's the case for a moment, and let's say that a person is like that. To the to the extent that you get closer, you don't look at things as if they're either good and evil. And but that's the paradoxical thing. When you don't look at things as if they were just good and evil, then you are good. And when you do look at things as if they were good and evil, then you're evil. It's paradoxical in a way. So I agree with what you're saying in a way, but and the reason that I'm saying this is that it makes sense in
I'd
like
say I'd want to nuance that. I think it's when you see the world as good and bad, like just a general
yes,
commonsensical concepts of good and bad. Yeah, this is
yes,
nonsense. This is NPC behavior. But
that's
if
evil.
you're, uh, yeah, yeah, okay, go on with what you're
Yeah,
saying.
yeah, pretty much. And then um, it checks out with my experience because if you look at NPCs can be neutral until they're pressured a little bit, and then they always venomous. Like they always judge other people, they attack other people, they ignore things in a brutal way sometimes. Things that are, that you just don't ignore in the moment sometimes that are clearly there and you have to make an effort to ignore. So it's willful. Like if you observe NPCs, it's like that. They're not just neutral all the time. If they were neutral all the time, they would be an enlightened being in a way. They would be able to look at everything without
Yeah,
any attachment,
no,
without any
it's true. When the pressure increases, the NPC sometimes a little love arises, and
always
sometimes
no, always falls for evil. They always fall for evil. By definition, that's what an NPC is. That's
yeah,
my
I
opinion.
don't see it
Might not
that
be the
way.
case. I don't know.
Just regularly, they're just walking in circles. They're obsessed
Right.
with something. Maybe it's their job or just
Yeah.
some concept they are obsessed with, and they just walk around in circles, and things happen to them during their lives, and just the laws of karma govern what they do. They don't know what they do, but everything they do does have an effect, so it does come back to them. If they ignore some truth of life because they don't see it, then that truth of life will
But
manifest in some way in their life or in a next life.
can
um
that happen though? Can you, like, if there's a truth that is for you to see, can you just not see it? You can't lie to yourself. Yes, that's what I'm arguing. That's evil. But like the truth cannot, you cannot not see it if it's there for you to see.
but you cannot see it because, like, animals can just not see the separated sense of self.
Why?
they
The,
they just don't see it.
but that's the thing. We human
So
beings have this weird
we have
capacity of
that
being
too
aware.
with higher things. You know, we all see the separate sense of self, but there's higher, more subtle, more difficult laws that we just don't
Right.
perceive.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. But what do think is that everybody gets, to say it metaphorically, a piece of the truth is assigned to everybody. Some people maybe are very high in the, almost very close to God, and some people are very low there. But everybody has a little piece of the truth assigned to them. So how can you not see it? That little piece that is assigned to you
But they
it's
do see
there.
that little piece. Most NPCs are like 1% good or whatever. They, in my view, their core is neither. They're just going around in circles. But of course, in their life, in what they do, they discover, hey, there's something more to this. Even if you're just a simple man and you discover, I like fishing, I become a fisher, and you start giving attention, a fisherman, and you start giving attention to it. Um, a little knowledge, a little appreciation of God, a little of the truth will arise, a little bit. And
But
yeah, maybe
then,
this sticks into the rest of your life, or maybe in the rest of your life you just go asleep again. Or maybe in some other parts of your life, maybe he rapes his daughter also. Maybe he's also a little caught up in evil, but in his fishing, he has a true innocence. But
okay, but what's the
this is what
difference
it
then
looked like to
between?
me.
Okay, but that's the thing, because I think the fundamental mistake that you're making, in my opinion, is that you're still putting evil in what I would just call merely bad. You still putting evil in just human dealings and badness and erratic stuff and stuff that is maybe painful and stuff like that. But that's not what I call evil. What I call
No,
evil is more like the.
that's true. But usually I use those examples because I reckon that when people murder, when people rape, or when people have a passion for their job, that a large part of it is just practical stuff. But usually, I think there is a little inkling or beginning of good and evil in those things. A little bit of love.
I mean, most
When
of
I
the
see
time,
people talking about their job or whatever, just normal everyday people, you can see the beginnings of understanding and stuff. There is a little love in there already, and it's not much. But I use the. It's true that I use good and bad examples, but there aren't other examples to use. But I use them because usually there's also a little, just a little, yeah, a little seedling of the beginning of the choice you're gonna make later in life. But you sample. You're living in a sort of separated self-consciousness realm where power rules, and this is just a karmic principle. You do stuff happens to you, neither good or evil. And then through doing the stuff and things happening to you will discover a little bit of love, understanding, or fear and hate, and maybe you discover after a while Schadenfreude, right? Like when you're laughing at someone else's pain. A lot of humans do this, and this is a little evil extraction of energy from another person. So I see that as evil, but it's a little bit, and it's quite compartmentalized, and even people who can be quite loving in other areas of life often still engage in it. And when you're like 100% good or full, when you're fully pure, fully aligned, you won't do that stuff anymore. But you can see that it persists. Sort of little 1% evils can persist for a long time in someone's development.
yeah, like I see what you mean. Yeah, I fundamentally agree with it. The thing is that, yeah, like the difference is where I do see that there's also like a general tendency. Like there are people whose general tendency is not towards truth and growth and healing, so to speak, but it's more towards the lie.
The opposite.
That's
The
a different.
opposite.
That's what I call like either or. That's the aspect that I see as either or. But then the rest, I see that as you say, like that. Like if you took, hypothetically speaking, all the people that are actually good, you will still see they're all full of errors, and we all fall for stuff from time to time, and in different ways, you know. But
Yeah,
for me,
but
it is important to also know that there's an either and an or.
yes,
Like
and with that observation you have, I also had sort of the same observation about this people generally being aligned not to truth, but also not to nothingness. They were generally aligned to anti-truth. And that's
correct,
weird, right? Because the
correct.
NPC couldn't do that. So I also observed that. But for
That's
me,
interesting.
how I so I think you're right in observing that, but I don't think this is caused by the nature of the game, by the nature of NPCs. I think this is caused um, by the actual presence and existence of evil in our on our planet, on our societies, and they have like manipulated the general culture through whatever religion, media, you know, institutions of power, government. They have manipulated the general orientation or the general culture towards evil. So there's like a small minority that is actually anti-truth, but they have their values have been blasted out into the world as normal or as good, and the NPCs pick these values up from their broadcasting. And that's why
Correct.
the NPC is sort of disproportionately in the vicinity of evil or has opinions that could only be invented by evil. But
Right.
that's not because the NPC is evil, but because he cannot distinguish and evil is broadcasting it into the world. And if there was less of a presence of evil, less of a chokehold on general culture and society via religion, media, all that sort of stuff, the NPCs would not um, toy with the evil forms so much. It would be more random. So
But
this is
I
my
think that
explanation.
they always by default will, because only the evil forces have an interest in having NPCs follow them. Like free people don't want slaves. Like, you know
Yeah,
what I
I
mean?
don't want
Like
slaves, but I do want to influence NPCs to also step into love. I want that, and
that cannot
I
that won't never happen. It has to come from within them, because for the moment that happens,
yeah,
they stop
sure.
being NPCs.
But why did Jesus come then? He wanted to show us, to help us, to also become like him.
So
Our
those who have
we
eyes to
simple
see could
humans.
see him. Like of course,
Yeah,
like we
yeah. It's true what you say that you can
but he
only
still was
truly learn
crucified.
it when there is a desire in you or a
Correct.
readiness in you. But it can also be triggered by teachers. You know, the,
But to the extent that it can, in my what I believe is that it can only happen by per chance, in the sense that you are a certain person, and then you were sitting on a bar talking, and then somebody heard you, and that was like, whoa, wow, yes. But in a systematic way, in a specific way, like if like, oh, I want to, have certain type of influence in NPCs to do certain stuff, then that's evil.
that if it, I think that's true. That the person aligned with love will probably not get all too specific, but maybe sometimes he does.
Like we can
Um,
maybe put,
for example, if you want to reform something like education or the law, there could be people aligned with love that would work, and they think, oh, if I do it this way, blah blah blah, then it would be they would be stimulated in that way. You can go sort of specific, but not as specific as the evil ones say. Be my slave. Come here. Say this. Do that.
but that's
Yes,
not,
that's
well,
true.
that's interesting because that's not what evil people do. What evil people do the contrary of that. They do what the snake does in the story, right? They tell the NPCs, you are free, you are a strong and independent person, and you have opinions of your own. Okay,
Yes, but that's only to tempt you. When you're like lured
correct,
in, they start commanding and stuff. I mean, that's what they really want.
right? Yeah, I do see that.
And that's not what we want. So we have a less systematic approach, I think. That's true. But the orientation in our hearts and minds, I think it wants to reach those NPCs just as much as evil wants to reach them, just in a different way.
You do that. I don't.
You don't want to reach them?
I mean, like I want to reach whomever
Yeah,
um,
anyone.
wants
Uh,
to be reached. I don't have. I want to reach specifically NPCs. I don't know. I mean,
I
I
mean,
don't
I,
mind
I
if it
don't,
reaches the middle.
I'm not on a mission to save the NPCs or whatever,
It's kind of
but yeah,
contradictory the way
also
I
the
see it.
NPCs.
Like for
I
me,
also want to reach NPCs.
the way I see it is a bit contradictory because almost by definition, NPCs are not reachable, and that's what makes them NPCs. It's like their soul is hidden or repressed or maybe lost, if that's possible. I don't know. That's kind of by definition. That's why it's like a non-player character. It's somebody that is there but is not there. So what is there to reach?
Yeah,
And if
they're
there is
there,
something to reach, then that's not an NPC.
but there is something to reach. Just the normal human consciousness. This is also something that's alive, that exists. But it's why we call them NPCs is because we presume that it's from the perspective of love or hate, right? From good or evil, the regular human is an NPC because he doesn't operate yet in that slightly higher level of love and understanding. So in that regard, it's an NPC. But there's also just a lower level where NPCs are way more alive than animals. Um,
No, are you sure?
yeah, I'm
How?
sure.
How? I'm not
Well,
sure. I
NPCs
mean,
reach your consciousness way more than animals.
I don't know. From my simple observations, I would say that that's not the case. I would say that the problem with NPCs is precisely that they're in a subhuman state, that they're in a state that is lower than animals. Like, because, and I think it's by the same token, the same thing that allows us human beings kind of like to transcend our animal natures, which is not the same as rejecting them or refusing them or repressing them, but it's like you can transcend it. So you can be in the world, but not of the world, right? The same, whatever you want to call it, condition or capacity that allows us to do that also allows us to do the contrary, to become lower than animals, to become less alive than maybe even plants. So in a way, for me, almost by definition, NPC is that. NPCness is that. It's like it's not just a neutral, like an animal. It's not
I
just like
don't think
a,
I don't think it's that bad.
it's not a skill issue. It's not just a lack of something, of a capacity. It is a,
I do see it just as a skill issue. And
well,
I
then we
think,
have different definitions, though. But because I don't call people with skill issues NPCs. That's disrespectful in a way. Some people are, there are dumb people who are way more heroic than all Hollywood celebrities put together. And it's not a romanticization of stupidity. What I'm saying here, that's actually the case. So it's like it is only an NPC will call a person like that an NPC. You know what I'm saying? Because it's just not the case.
yeah,
There's a qualitative difference. So
there is a truth in that, that the word NPC is probably a little tainted, right, by judgment from people.
Correct.
But
Correct.
I think I just use the word. I also like, I sometimes also like to use very negative slurs or whatever, or just word. It doesn't have that connotation anymore for me.
No, yeah, I
For me,
understand because
the
I also
NPC just means not living in the realm, in the slightly higher realm of understanding and love. And I'm also an NPC in some areas still. I'm not fully there.
so for you
So
use it's
I
just like a skills type of stuff.